Hey guys, tonight we're slipping through a side gate in the stone wall of a 15th century convent just outside Florence. You're expecting prayer candles and silence, Gregorian chants echoing through the cloister, a whiff of incense or maybe musty old books. But nope. What hits your nose first is lemon, maybe clove, something warm and botanical, like you've stepped into a forest where the trees are cooking. You follow the scent through corridors dimly lit by oil lamps, and eventually reach a low, arched room glowing with copper stills, drying herbs, and rows of small glass vials, each corked like it holds a secret. Yes, this convent smells amazing. And also, you probably won't survive this. See, it's not just perfume they're making here. Some of those flasks contain salves for syphilis, potions to calm hysteria, even untraceable poisons brewed under a holy oath. The sisters know exactly what they're doing. The outside world just doesn't know they're doing it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You press deeper into the convent, feet muffled by woven rushes underfoot. Your fingertips graze cool limestone. Somewhere above you, nuns chant Compline in Latin, but here below, you're surrounded by aromas that would make a modern spa blush. One nun stirs a copper pot filled with what looks like crushed violets and fermented honey. Another gently decants a syrupy amber liquid into a tiny blue glass bottle, murmuring a prayer you can't quite catch. Back in the Renaissance, convents weren't just places of spiritual retreat. They were also paradoxical little engines of knowledge, especially for women. Sure, the official line was obedience, chastity, and poverty, but tucked away behind thick walls, many convents were running what you could fairly call the first scientific labs for women in Europe, especially in Italy, where perfume wasn't merely a cosmetic delight but a kind of invisible armor. Against disease, against status anxiety, against death itself. And the women leading this aromatic revolution? Nuns, let that sink in. While men in Florence, Venice and Milan were waging wars, writing treatises or painting ceilings, nuns were quietly distilling sandalwood, pressing rose petals, and inventing rudimentary versions of the eau de toilette. It wasn't just for hygiene, though, that helped. Bathing was, let's say, optional back then. It wasn't only for prayer rituals either, though scented oils did appear in plenty of liturgical rites. No, the nuns were part of something bigger. Historians still argue whether these convents should be seen as proto-feminist institutions or simply pragmatic offshoots of the church's bureaucracy. But one thing's clear, they smelled a lot better than the outside world. Picture this. Outside the convent, Florence reeks. Chamber pots fly from windows. The Arno River doubles as a garbage chute. People rub onions on open wounds and drink vinegar for their health. Inside the convent, meanwhile, there's a nun named Sister Benedetta applying a paste made from rosemary, myrtle, and wine-soaked iris root to a novice with swollen joints. Another nun is crushing coriander seeds to blend with almond oil, murmuring notes into a leather-bound herbal grimoire. You're standing between two worlds, filth and fragrance. It wasn't always this way, of course. In the early Middle Ages, most convents were modest, even rustic. But by the Renaissance, especially in wealthy city-states like Florence, Naples and Venice, many had grown into mini citadels of learning. These weren't just sanctuaries for pious women. They were often the only place an educated woman could live and work without being dismissed as either a threat or a novelty. And so, knowledge pooled here, sometimes literally. Rainwater tanks fed the stills. Beeswax was harvested and filtered in waxy sieves. Herbs hung from every beam, drying under the watchful eye of nuns who knew which plant cured what, which time of year produced the strongest scent, and which rich widow might pay double for a vial of lavender oil if you threw in some orange blossom for memory loss. Of course, they didn't call it a lab, but that's what it was. A place of experimentation, observation, record-keeping. You can almost hear the sisters discussing ratios of balm to myrrh, noting that rose oil keeps longer in ceramic jars than glass, or arguing gently over whether bergamot attracts too many flies. One mainstream fact: Florence was one of the first cities to host public apothecaries regulated by guilds, but many formulas originated inside monastic communities, often stolen, repackaged, and sold under male names. The nuns' contributions rarely made it into the city records. Still, the convents endured, in part because they had a secret weapon: time. The outside world was a rush of deadlines and political drama, but inside these walls the liturgical rhythms slowed everything down. You had hours, whole days even, to perfect a formula, to pray, while steeping clove buds in wine, to document how long a distilled tincture held its scent in cold weather. And you didn't do it for fame. You did it because you believed it mattered. That healing, real healing, smelled like something sacred. Quirky tidbit? Some convents believed that scent could influence the soul. One abbess even wrote that anointing. The temples with lily oil cooled the fevered imagination and chased away lustful apparitions. Make of that what you will. You pass one of the older sisters now, her face weathered like parchment, hands stained green at the fingertips. She nods at you, then goes back to filtering a syrupy liquid through cloth stitched with golden thread. Maybe it's a digestive tonic, maybe it's a perfume for a cardinal, maybe it's something more experimental. You don't ask, but already your senses are adjusting. That sharp spike of camphor earlier? Gone. Now you're noticing the warm, round scent of frankincense, the earthy pull of angelica root, the faint, intoxicating lift of lemon balm steeped in wine vinegar. It's like walking through time, bottled time. You feel drowsy now, not from the story, from the air itself, and we're only getting started. You move deeper into the convent, where the scent thickens and the air grows warmer. A long corridor opens into a vaulted workroom with counters made of worn wood and burnished copper. There's no rush here, just steady, practiced motion. A nun you barely noticed slips past, balancing a tray of glass ampules like she's carrying a reliquary. Another hums under her breath while grinding cardamom in a mortar the size of your head. It's all surprisingly methodical. And that's when it hits you. These women aren't just making things smell good. They're chemists, quiet ones, hidden. But make no mistake, they know what they're doing. Here, in the middle of a society that largely denied women access to formal education, nuns built quiet kingdoms of knowledge behind stone walls. They had the time, the tools, and, crucially, the excuse. It's for healing, they'd say, for anointing the sick, for the glory of God, which, conveniently, covered a lot of scientific ground. You trail behind Sister Lucia, her habit smudged with a ring of blue from dried woad. She gestures toward a tall copper still, its tubing coiling like a sleeping snake. This is where the magic happens, distillation. The ancient process of boiling plants, catching their steam, and condensing it into scented water or essential oil. Long before chemists wore goggles, these nuns wore wimples, and experimented with steam pressure. Steam pressure? Yes, you're still in a convent. Mainstream fact time, the process of distillation was well established in the Arab world by the 9th century and gradually spread into Europe via translations and trade. By the 14th century, it had found a strange, fragrant home in monastic life, especially among women, religious orders who had centuries of herbal lore tucked away in Latin scrolls. What made these nuns unique wasn't that they learned it, it's that they refined it. They documented tweaks, how rose petals yielded more oil if harvested before sunrise, how lemon zest should steep in grain alcohol no more than 2 days, lest it go bitter. And they passed this knowledge on in the most nun-like way imaginable, through quiet observation, whispered instruction, and prayerful repetition. Historians still argue whether the nuns were actively innovating or simply preserving ancient knowledge from classical texts. But let's be real, when you're adjusting ratios and building stills with custom cooling arms, that's more than babysitting history. That's science, with sandals. You watch as 2 novices measure out grains of benzoin, resin, their sleeves carefully pinned back. Their focus is monk-like, but this isn't rote memorization. They're tinkering, replacing elderflower with orris root to see if it blends better with musk. They record each result in cramped Latin, stored in codices locked inside wooden cabinets, with keys worn around the abbess's neck. You pause beside one of these books. Its cover is scarred and smells faintly of beeswax. Inside, pages of symbols, sketches of plant roots, margin notes arguing over whether fennel prolongs the shelf life of peppermint oil. You can't help but smile. It's a very holy kind of nerdery. A fringe tidbit. One convent reportedly trained sisters to memorize long scent compositions by singing them as psalms. That way, even if a rival convent, or worse, a suspicious bishop, confiscated the books, the recipes would survive in song. Imagine humming a rosemary-rosewater blend while kneeling in chapel, hiding a formula in plain Gregorian sight. You continue your tour, passing a cluster of flasks labelled with mysterious names: Aqua Angelica, Spiritus Hyssopi, Oleum Mirabile. One sister is stirring something in a thick glass bowl, muttering about someone's stubborn gout. Another waves you away from a boiling pot. Too sharp on the nose, she warns, unless you want to sneeze through supper. It's not all perfume, of course. Much of what they made blurred the line between fragrance and pharmacy. Lavender and mint to ease headaches. Chamomile and elderflower to treat fever. Clove and nutmeg to numb toothaches. Assuming you still had teeth, which in Renaissance Italy was something of a luxury. There's a dark side to this too. The same skills that let you coax scent from flowers could also extract venom from roots. Some historians whisper about convents that dabbled in poisons, not just to eliminate pests, but let's just say not every rival abbess died of natural causes, and when rich noblewomen took sanctuary behind convent walls, not all of them stayed out of family politics. A bottle of sweet-smelling elixir could carry all kinds of messages, but you're not here to cast aspersions. You're here to marvel, and marvel you do, especially at the tools. Some are handmade, wood-carved with Latin prayers. Others are imported, gifts from wealthy patrons. A glass alembic etched with a Medici crest gleams on a shelf, half filled with a milky liquid that smells faintly of basil and citrus. It's both beautiful and strangely ominous, like a forgotten relic from an alchemist's dream. Even now, centuries later, the craftsmanship stuns. These women weren't dabbling. They were professionals, even if no one called them that. Their laboratories might have looked like kitchens or infirmaries, but make no mistake, they were proto-industrial spaces of serious work. And their products? Subtle, powerful, deeply coveted. You sit for a moment near a carved window. The late afternoon light slants across the stone floor, illuminating a trail of dried lavender scattered like breadcrumbs. You inhale, then exhale. The air itself feels different, alive, crafted. Outside these walls, people talk about nuns like they're frozen in time, forever kneeling, forever silent. But in here, you see the truth. They were distillers, healers, herbalists, and experimenters. They didn't just preserve divine fragrance, they created it, bottled it, shared it, sold it, and did it all while singing psalms in perfect Latin. A bell tolls softly in the distance. Vespers. You feel the rhythm of the day shifting, but the convent doesn't stop. The scents change subtly. Sharper herbs give way to sweeter notes. Maybe jasmine. Maybe orange blossom. It's like the work itself knows how to breathe. You follow Sister Lucia again as she moves toward a quieter, dimmer part of the compound. Here the stills are fewer, the shelves older, the recipes stranger. These are the archives, both literal and olfactory. Shelves of apothecary jars labelled in Latin, dusted but undisturbed. One's marked Pulvis Sanctae Clarae, the powder of St. Clare. Another, Aqua Vitae ad cordis dolorem, living water for heartbreak. You're not entirely sure whether that's metaphor or medicine. Lucia lights a small oil lamp and begins turning the pages of a heavy folio. It's wrapped in linen and smells like mildew and honey. Inside, the convent's perfume formulas, some centuries old, some with margin notes in 3 different hands. There's no index, of course. You're in a time when bookmarks were pressed. Flowers and footnotes were doodled angels with scrolls. This section is different, not just quieter, but heavier, like the air itself has memory. The scents here aren't for market stalls or rich noblewomen. They're sacred, meant for rituals, for deathbeds, for ghosts. One mainstream fact: scent played a major role in Catholic ritual. Incense, oils, and balms were not just symbols of purification, they were believed to physically repel evil. Priests used scented chrism to anoint babies and dying men alike. But behind many of those vials handed to clergy stood a nun, stirring carefully in the dark. You lift one bottle and sniff. It smells like myrrh and rain. Another, sealed with wax, smelled cold, like stone and violets. You wonder who it was made for. A bishop, a child, a sister buried in the garden chapel. Historians still argue whether the formulas preserved in convents were original creations or adaptations of older Greco-Roman medical texts. But this you can tell from the ink and handwriting. Someone cared. Someone refined this recipe again and again, hoping it would do more than just mask decay, hoping it would comfort. Lucia points to one marginal note. You squint. It reads, "Too much rosemary made Sister Agnese weep uncontrollably, reduced by half." You imagine Sister Agnese, tiny, devout, and suddenly sobbing mid-mass because her cassock reeked of nostalgia. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some convents, nuns were tasked with preparing perfumes specifically for visions. One 15th century sister claimed the Virgin Mary only appeared when the chapel was filled with the scent of almond and dew-wet roses. Whether divine or delusional, the formula was recorded and reused. You can't help but wonder what modern psychologists would say. You pass a small cabinet labelled Memoria. Lucia opens it reverently. Inside, a set of perfume stones, porous terracotta discs once soaked in oils and placed in grave cloths. The scents linger, faint but haunting. Death in the Renaissance was something you prepared for your whole life, and for some, that included picking out your final fragrance. Outside, the world feared decay, but here they studied it. Not to dwell on morbidity, but to interrupt it. Delay it, sweeten it. These weren't just perfumes, they were negotiations with mortality and occasionally weapons. Lucia lifts a vial with a skull scratched faintly into the glass. No label, just a look in her eyes that says, "Don't open it. You don't. You're not an idiot." There are whispers, even in church records, about nuns who were too learned in the ways of potions. One Venice convent was investigated after a series of sudden deaths. Patrons, donors, even a visiting priest. Nothing was proven, of course. But the formulas in their archives vanished mysteriously soon after. Still, most of what these women made wasn't sinister. It was sacred, protective. Tender. One sister you pass on your way out of the archives is wrapping small sachets in linen. Inside, lavender, marjoram, lemon balm. These are for the infirmary, placed under pillows to calm trembling hands or stop night terrors. There's nothing flashy about it, just quiet care. And that's something people often miss. This wasn't about fame. These perfumes, these oils, they weren't about selling out or building brands. They were about easing pain in a world where most people had no access to medicine, no explanation for their suffering, and no anesthesia stronger than fermented wine. It's getting darker now. The last light of day stretches like honey across the stone floor. You catch a final scent as you leave the archives, rosewood and sage. It follows you like a memory. As the nuns head to chapel, the lab falls silent, but the warmth lingers. The air still hums faintly from the stills, and a faint curl of steam rises from a pot left to simmer overnight. You step back into the corridor, a little overwhelmed. Not because you've seen too much, but because you realize you've only just scratched the surface. The chapel bells finish their ringing, and for a moment, the whole convent falls into hush. You stay still. Even your breath feels loud. Then softly, footsteps. Dozens of them, all in rhythm, all in silence, like a single body moving through stone and candlelight. You watch from a doorway as the sisters enter the chapel, each one bowing slightly before taking her place. The scent in the air has shifted again. It's spicier, more resinous. Frankincense and myrrh burned just enough to fog the air without choking it. One sister carries a censer, swinging it gently so the smoke dances in lazy spirals. And suddenly, it clicks. Scent isn't just a product here, it's the medium. The air itself is part of the prayer. You linger as the sisters chant. The harmonies rise, not quite music, not quite language, just sound laid over scent like fabric on skin. You don't understand Latin, but you understand this. This is theatre, this is chemistry, this is devotion in stereo, mainstream historical fact. The use of incense and scented oils in Christian ritual was inherited directly from Jewish temple traditions and the Roman imperial cult. From early Christianity onward, certain scents, frankincense, spikenard, cinnamon, were considered so holy they were reserved for sacraments, blessings, and burial rites. In some regions, perfume wasn't just allowed, it was required. But unlike the loud spectacle of papal masses or cathedral processions, the nuns' use of scent was subtler, private, sometimes secret. Not all convents had permission to burn incense or produce chrism. Many had to make do with herbal equivalents that could pass inspection while still making the room feel blessed. You step back into the hallway, the chant echoing behind you. The lab is quiet again, it stills at rest. Lucia rejoins you, her face calm, but her hands ink-stained. She invites you to see the other side of the work, not the laboratory, but the distribution. Because let's not pretend these holy smells stayed locked in here. Oh no, they travelled. Perfumed oils, healing balms, and scented waters made by nuns were prized far beyond the cloister walls. Wealthy patrons, bishops, even kings wrote letters begging for more of that miraculous balm or that rose elixir that seemed to stop fever in its tracks. In a world where half of Europe stank and bathing was suspicious, something that made you smell clean and holy, that was practically divine intervention. You reach the convent's front parlour, technically the turning room. There's a large wooden turnstile built into the wall. No face-to-face meetings here. You place your request on one side, give it a gentle spin, and receive your blessed goods without ever laying eyes on the sister behind the wall. It's like a Renaissance-era Amazon Dropbox, but instead of toothbrushes or batteries, you get a vial of orange blossom oil and a prayer card. Quirky tidbit? Some convents got so good at perfumery that they developed literal waitlists. Like a Michelin-starred kitchen, you couldn't just waltz in and request Oleum Benedicta. You had to send a letter, sometimes a bribe, and maybe a relic for good measure. Some noble women tried to use flirtatious messengers to curry favor. Others just donated an entire villa. Priorities. Lucia shows you a ledger. It's filled with entries like 4 vials rosewater to Signora Eleonora, 3 scudi paid in linen, or aquamenthe sent to Florence for merchant's ailing son. You can trace the scent trail across the map of Italy. And not just Italy, letters came from France, the Holy Roman Empire, even distant England, all begging for a nun's touch in a bottle. Historians still argue whether these perfumed remedies actually worked, or if it was all placebo. But let's be honest, in a world without modern medicine, the belief was half the cure. A balm that smelled like paradise, sent by holy women who prayed over each bottle? That was healing, whether it fixed your fever or not. You step aside as another nun brings in a basket of tiny glass vials, each sealed with wax and tied with a handwritten note. You peek at one for your child's cough. Breathe it in nightly. May the Blessed Virgin protect him. It's signed with a single initial. You think back to the archive, how carefully those formulas were written, revised, and guarded. This isn't mass production, it's personalized care, wrapped in ritual. And sometimes, well, it was a bit of a hustle. Some convents became financially self-sustaining through perfume sales. While the church disapproved of nuns engaging in commerce, loopholes were always available for those who framed it as charitable exchange. If a wealthy widow happened to pay double for a bottle of balm made with imported ambergris, well, who were the sisters to argue? Here's something you didn't expect. Scent wasn't just about luxury or piety, it was also identity. Each convent had its own signature blend, a kind of holy branding. One was known for its violet lavender, balm, another for its citrusy anointing oil. Word travelled. You could identify a visiting abbess by the perfume trailing behind her. Subtle, maybe, but effective, and it wasn't just external. Inside the convent, scent helped maintain the daily rhythm. Lavender for calm, basil for energy, clove oil for headaches, frankincense before prayers. Like spiritual aromatherapy, it wasn't just what you smelled, it was when. Lucia hands you a cloth sachet on your way out. You squeeze it gently, lemon balm, crushed mint, something faintly floral. For rest, she says, her voice soft as worn linen. Tonight, you'll need it. You nod because your head is full. Not just of scents, but of stories. Of formulas wrapped in psalms, of sisters counting drops like blessings. Of science performed in silence. Of power behind a veil. You step out into the courtyard again. Night has fallen, and the air is cool. The garden glows faintly in moonlight, and the scent now feels sweeter, almost deliberate. Like someone thought very carefully about what you'd carry with you when you left, and that, you realize, is the genius of it all. Even in the dark, their fragrance lingers. You wake up before dawn, or maybe you never slept. Hard to say. The scent of lemon balm still clings to your fingers from the sachet Sister Lucia gave you. You half expect to be back in your own bed with a dead phone battery and a cat sitting
on your chest. But no, you're still here, in the convent, in the Renaissance.
Welcome to daybreak with the sisters, where the bells don't snooze and the perfume is already steeping. Outside, the garden's coming to life again. Birds sing with theatrical flair, and dew clings to every leaf like the morning's trying to baptize you. You step through the cloister walk and spot the early crew. 3 sisters, veils pinned up, already grinding petals and soaking herbs. They nod without speaking. Not because they're unfriendly, but because their hands are deep in crushed violets and time is ticking. This is the shift where timing is everything. Distillation, you now realize, isn't just pouring something into a pot and waiting. It's drama, it's math, it's a war between fire and evaporation. One mainstream historical fact: Renaissance nuns were early adopters of alchemical distillation techniques. Long before chemistry was chemistry, these women were heating retorts, collecting condensation, and separating essences like tiny cloistered Einsteins. The alembic, a bulbous copper distillation tool, was their best friend. You could say it was the medieval version of a ring light, essential for creating beauty, impossible to explain to outsiders. You watch as Sister Clara adjusts the flame beneath an alembic. Too hot, and the lavender oil turns bitter. Too cool, and it just sits there, sulking. She waits, counts under her breath, then adds a single crushed clove to the vat. For warmth, she mutters, mostly to herself. You lean in and catch the shift. The steam changes colour slightly, curling upward like silk ribbons. It smells intoxicating. Not like modern perfume. No alcohol bite, just raw, sweet, herbal.
Mystery. Quirky tidbit. Some nuns believe the scent of the herbs changed depending on the mood of the person distilling them. A cheerful sister made brighter oils. A cranky one? Sour undertones.
So before major distillation, they'd sometimes fast, confess, or spend an hour in silent prayer. Scent, they believed, carried spirit. And you really don't want your healing balm to reek of unresolved guilt. Lucia appears beside you again, sipping a strange-looking tea. She offers you some. It smells like rosemary and boiled apple peel. You accept because peer pressure doesn't disappear in the 15th century. Today is Rose Day, she says. Our most delicate process. You follow her to the Rose Room. Not its official name, obviously, but it fits. Inside, bushels of fresh-cut roses piled like the floor of a royal wedding. Pale pinks, deep reds, even a rare yellow blossom or two. The air is thick with sweetness, almost too much. like candy melting in the sun. The sisters begin pulling petals from stems with monk-like precision. It's not random. Each petal is inspected, sorted, and either used or tossed. One has brown edges. Gone. Another too tight. Nope. This is perfume, not potpourri. Lucia explains the process. The petals will be soaked, then slowly heated in water. The steam will be trapped, cooled, and collected drop by precious drop. This is hydrosol rose water, but real. Not that plastic scented stuff from tourist shops. This water is alive. Historians still argue whether the rose water made in convents was medicinal or cosmetic. Truth? It was both. Rose water cooled fevers, soothed burns, calmed babies, refreshed noblewomen's cheeks, and sprinkled in holy fonts. It was religion and rebellion, depending on where you poured it. You help stir the vat with a long wooden paddle. The petals swirl, releasing their oils into the water like whispered confessions. Your hands smell like heaven. Or at least like a really good memory. In the corner, a sister writes, not prayers, notes. Meticulous logs of temperatures, blossom weight, steeping.
Times. This is science in a wimple, folks.
Lab notebooks centuries before the Enlightenment would try to patent curiosity. Another sister prepares tiny linen bags, each to be filled with rosewater-drenched cotton and sent to women in labor. Not to stop the pain, don't be ridiculous, but to offer something soft, to inhale, to grip, to cling to when things got real. And, well, messy, you're struck by the absurd tenderness of it. These women didn't just make perfume for aristocrats. They made it for mothers, for the dying, for the scared. A scent to carry you through a moment you couldn't escape. Quirky moment, there's a rumor, almost certainly apocryphal, that one nun refused to use anything but roses grown from bushes she personally sang to. When asked why, she allegedly replied, "Because they know my voice." You want it to be true, you really do. By mid-morning, the rose distillation is in full swing. The room is humid, petals collapsing into pulp, and the still drips slow, clear drops into a blue glass bottle. Each drop reflects the light like a tiny prayer. You sit entranced. Sister Clara leans over and says, "It takes about 2,000 petals to make one vial." You blink. You look at the vial, maybe half full. You do the math. You give up on the math. Let's just say it's a lot of rose murder. But it explains why this stuff was precious, why a few drops were treated like gold, why people offered gold in return. The sisters won't sell you any, of course. But Lucia presses a damp cloth into your hand as you leave. Rose water for your pocket. It will help you sleep, she says. You believe her. As you step back into the sunlit courtyard, the scent clinging to your clothes and your fingers feels like more than fragrance. It's history. It's care. It's a secret passed down through steam and patience and silent, blistered hands. You pass a young novice humming as she cleans glass bottles. The song is sweet, a lullaby maybe. You don't know the words, but it lingers in your ears, just as the scent lingers in your clothes, and you realize nothing here is just what it seems. Even a flower boiled at dawn can carry centuries on its breath. The day has grown long, and you swear the sunlight has turned syrupy, thick, golden, and slow. Somewhere in the distance, a bell chimes. Nun, the mid-afternoon prayer. But the nuns, they're not heading to the chapel. Not yet. Because something far more delicate than prayer is unfolding in the cloister's shadowy underbelly. You follow Sister Lucia through a narrow stairwell beneath the herbarium, the walls cool and damp, like the inside of a clay jar. You half expect bats, maybe a crypt, but what greets you is something else entirely. A cellar filled with glass. Tiny bottles, tall vials, stoppered flasks, rows and rows, each catching what little light slips through the slatted window like a prism. This is the convent's fragrance. Vault. Lucia moves like she's entering a chapel. No loud steps, no sudden gestures. Just reverence and a faint jingling of keys. She unlocks a cabinet with a curve so elegant it could have been carved by a sculptor, except you learn it was made by a nun who once trained as a furniture artisan before taking her vows. These are the top shelf scents. The ones they don't use for everyday balm or rosewater cloths. No, these are the perfume concentrates, the heavy hitters. One drop of these in a tub of water would perfume an entire dormitory, maybe a small village or a very determined duchess. Mainstream, historical fact. In the late Renaissance, Italy was home to some of the world's most refined scent production. While the Medici court in Florence had its own famed perfumers, many of the most consistent, potent and experimental fragrance materials were sourced from convents. These religious women weren't just replicating formulas, they were inventing them. Lucia lets you sniff a bottle labeled Viola Nigrata. You brace yourself. Expect something floral, faint, maybe shy. What you get is an almost chocolatey darkness, like violet petals left to ferment in the mind of a dream. It's not soft, it's sensual, assertive. It shouldn't be allowed, but here it is, made by women who kneel 5 times a day and never leave these walls. The recipe? Locked in a leather-bound book with no title. Only a cross on the cover and several ink-blotted initials scrawled throughout. You get a peek, just a few lines, but the language isn't Latin, it's a code, a private cipher developed by the convent's perfume scribe, because of course, perfume secrets are still secrets. Historians still argue whether these scent codices were about preserving spiritual integrity or protecting commercial assets. Some say the nuns feared that sharing too freely would lead to their work being corrupted by vanity or greed. Others think it was a savvy move to maintain dominance in a competitive and male-dominated fragrance industry because, surprise, there was an industry. By the 16th century, perfumers had their own guilds, their own courts, and their own scandals. And convents? Convents were sitting on the olfactory equivalent of buried treasure. You wander through the cellar, breathing in the notes like you're reading a diary written in vapor. There's bergamot preserved in beeswax, clove steeped in white wine, a vial of what smells like lightning, and old wood, aged oak resin, Lucia explains, used for grounding more volatile top notes. And then you see a locked chest. This one's different. Iron clasps, a hidden drawer. Lucia hesitates before opening it. Inside, the experimental shelf. These aren't just perfumes. These are attempts, failed recipes, rejected blends. The convent's forgotten stardust. Some smell awful. There's one that hits your nose like burning sage and damp paper towels. Another smells like a haunted pastry. You recoil. Lucia laughs. Quirky tidbit. Some nuns believed scent could capture the devil himself. That certain combinations of herbs and oils could ward off sin or trap it. One convent reportedly spent 3 years trying to develop a demon-repellent cologne. It was never released. For reasons you can probably guess, you ask Lucia if any of these perfumes were ever stolen. She pauses. Well, she says, there was the case of Sister Camilla. Ah, yes. Every good mystery needs a rebel. Camilla, as the story goes, was a novice who showed extraordinary olfactory talent. She could identify a scent blend after a single sniff and once recreated an entire lost formula just from memory. A prodigy, and a bit dramatic. One summer, a visiting nobleman whose name conveniently no one recalls was so enchanted by one of the convent's fragrances that he sent word offering 10 times the usual donation if they could send the perfumer who made it to his estate for 1 month of instruction. The abbess declined, of course, but one night Sister Camilla disappeared. Vanished. The only trace left behind? A half-finished bottle of something labelled Lilium Obscura. The scent was unlike anything in the convent. Smoky, floral, sharp. Lucia lets you smell it, and you reel. It's beautiful, addictive, unfinished. Historians still argue whether Camilla ran away with the nobleman, was abducted, or merely fled to start her own perfumery under an assumed name. Some claim she died. Others say her descendants run a boutique fragrance house in Sicily to this day, but the truth? It's lost to time. What lingers is the scent, Lilium Obscura, still sits on its dusty shelf, untouched. No one's dared to recreate it. Lucia says some believe it's cursed, that any nun who tries will meet the same fate as Camilla. You hold the bottle a little tighter. It smells like risk as you leave the vault. The scent clings to your sleeve. Not rose water this time. Not lavender or mint or basil. Something rarer. You walk back into daylight, blinking like a cave dweller re-entering the world. The garden is alive again. Sunlight through rosemary, bees thick in the air, and distant singing. But in your mind it's still dark, still glass, still secrets stacked like bottles on a shadowed shelf. And you can't help but wonder, what did Sister Camilla smell like when she ran? By now you've learned 2 things for certain. Perfume isn't just about smelling nice, and nuns are a lot more hardcore than they look. These women don't just distill roses, they distill memory, devotion, danger. And today you're heading into the grittiest corner of their world yet, the medicine cellar. Yes, it sounds like the backdrop for a medieval crime drama. You're not entirely wrong. Lucia hands you a linen mask soaked in vinegar and herbs. For the stronger odours, she says, slipping one over her own mouth and nose like a plague doctor in habit form. You follow her into a room that smells like, well, imagine a wet apothecary fighting with an overripe garden. There's mint, myrrh, camphor, frankincense, and something sharp and smoky that might actually be burnt frog. You don't ask, because this isn't perfume making for the faint of heart. This is medicinal fragrance, where scent becomes salve and science turns spiritual. Mainstream historical fact. In Renaissance Italy, convents weren't just religious centres, they doubled as pharmacies. The nuns compounded ointments, tinctures, and essential oils, many of which were sold or distributed to townspeople. Long before modern pharmaceuticals, convent-made perfumes played a real role in healing. You're introduced to Sister Benedetta, a tiny woman with arms like tree roots and the voice of someone who knows you're not washing your hands properly. She gestures to a table laid out with vials, scrolls, and a single roasted onion. Don't ask yet. We're preparing the plague. Balm, she says, like she's asking you to hand her the butter. And that's when you realize this perfume lab wasn't built to cater to the luxury crowd. Sure, duchesses swooned over jasmine extracts, but peasants, merchants, sick children and soldiers and the dying, they came to the nuns for things like disease warders and cleansing oils. In one corner of the room is a crucifix. In another, a mortar and pestle stained from years of grinding God knows what. Literally. The concoction they're making now includes myrrh, garlic, dried rose petals, vinegar, and a few secret herbs you're not allowed to ask about. You help stir the mix, and for a second you wonder if this is what soup smells like in hell. But Benedetta nods approvingly. "It'll draw the fever out through the souls," she mutters. Fringe fact? Nuns often made posy cones, hollow cone-shaped papers filled with dried herbs and petals to hang near the sick. It was believed that good scents could chase out bad humours. People even carried scented pomanders to ward off contagion. Some were ball-shaped, others were tiny lockets. The fanciest had multiple compartments, essentially a Renaissance AirPod case filled with thyme. You peek at a small, oil-stained recipe book in the corner. Benedetta snaps it shut. "Not for your eyes," she says. "Contains recipes too potent for common use." Historians still argue whether these forbidden recipes actually existed or if they were part of the convent's mystique, a way to keep outsiders guessing and competitors nervous. Some scrolls from the time mention formulas that could allegedly revive fainted nuns, stall miscarriages, or even prevent melancholy of the womb, which sounds both vague and dramatic. You grind dried mint with a stone pestle, the scent rising like memory. Lucia explains that scent was one of the few ways women could exert direct influence over both body and spirit. When no one listened to your voice, you made your presence known through the air itself. Pause for that thought. They healed with vapor. Back in the hallway, you pass a rack of linen bandages soaked in lavender and honey, then dried in the sun. They'll be wrapped around burns or tied into poultices. You watch a young novice sprinkle powdered sage into a bucket of water. Not for the body, but to mop the floors. Because even cleanliness was scented. Even disinfectant had its poetry. There's one shelf, set apart from the others, with darker glass bottles. Lucia hesitates before showing you. "This," she says softly, "is for the dead." You blink. Renaissance burial wasn't exactly speedy, especially in hot climates. Convent-prepared embalming oils were used to anoint bodies, mask decomposition, and perhaps ease the soul's transition. Rosemary, clove, and cedar oil were common. In some cases, the scent was so strong, people claimed they could smell sainthood before they saw it. One quirky tidbit: some convents buried their perfumes along with the deceased. Not just a sprinkle, an entire bottle meant to guide the spirit by fragrance. At least one bishop's tomb was found centuries later with a sealed vial of jasmine balm still intact. The scent, reportedly unchanged. You sit for a moment, surrounded by scents of healing, dying, and everything in between. There's something strangely comforting in the idea that these women gave you something to smell while you passed from one world to the next. Lucia presses a cotton pad into your hand. It's soaked in marjoram and honey water. "For headaches," she says. You breathe it in, and for a moment, everything feels quiet, like standing still inside a clock tower. The ticking slows, the air feels thick but safe. And just as you're about to drift, Benedetta barks, "Back straight, don't faint."
On the poultices.
Right. Sorry, you leave the medicine cellar smelling like a pox-ridden rose bush, but you feel grounded, awake, even proud. Because today, you saw how scent becomes shield, how perfume in this place doesn't seduce, it saves. And as you walk back into the sun, your headache really is gone. Weird. By now, your nose has traveled more miles than your feet. You've inhaled centuries of crushed petals, steaming balms and secret tinctures. But it's time to get political. Because believe it or not, even in the quiet hush of the cloister, fragrance had currency. And you're about to witness a very different kind of holy transaction. You're ushered into the scriptorium, not the one with the illuminated psalms and sleepy monks, no. This is the nun version, cleaner, sharper, and perfumed with the faintest trace of ink, beeswax, and something bitterly citrusy, bergamot maybe, wafting from a sachet tucked under the abbotess's desk. Here the sisters conduct one of the most critical and riskiest parts of their fragrance work, negotiation. Because a convent, for all its spiritual ideals, still has bills, repairs, altar candles, wheat, wine. And what's the easiest thing to trade when you can't leave the walls or show your face in a public market? Scent. Perfume was one of the few convent-made commodities allowed to circulate. Beyond the cloister, it could be gifted, sold, or used to curry favor with nobles, bishops, or merchants, so long as the right paperwork accompanied it. Mainstream historical fact: many Renaissance convents operated as semi-independent businesses. While male clergy oversaw some of their external affairs, abbacies wielded considerable power over internal production and distribution, especially when it came to lucrative trades like perfumery, herbal medicine, and textiles. You watch Sister Isabella, the abbess's right hand, dip a quill in dark ink and scratch a note onto fine parchment. She's responding to a fragrance request, an actual letter from a marchesa in Ferrara asking for more of that exhilarating violet distillate from the Feast of St. Agnes. That's not just a polite ask, it's code. She's asking for the good stuff, the premium batch, and she's willing to send a wagon load of olive oil in return. You watch as the sisters weigh the offer, not with scales, but with glances. The oil is valuable, but so is the formula. If the Marchesa gets too liberal with it, there's the risk she'll hand it to a male perfumer who could reverse engineer it, or worse, claim it as his own. Historians still argue whether these fragrance for resource trades were acts of charity, business savvy, or subtle rebellion. Some nuns left behind ledgers so meticulous they rivaled those of Venetian spice traders. Others wrote about divine exchanges, where fragrance was offered in return for political protection, land, or even favors in papal courts. You peek over Isabella's shoulder and see her sign with the convent's floral sigil, 2 crossed sprigs of rosemary. It's not a name, it's a signature scent. The convent seal smelled before it was seen. Quirky tidbit: some convents infused their wax seals with essential oils. When you cracked open a letter, it wasn't just a visual reveal, it was aromatic. Messages arrived smelling like lemon balm, frankincense, or lavender. Scent was part of the brand. Lucia hands you a stack of old correspondences, some faded, others written in elegant curlicues. You skim one addressed to a duchess who wanted a discreet remedy for marital fatigue. It's signed only with a lily and a line that reads, "May you feel as renewed as a rose before dawn." You stare. You can't decide if that's poetry or passive aggression, possibly both. The scent politics weren't always so charming. You're led to a dusty ledger kept in a locked drawer, one that tracks a small war fought not with swords but with bath oil. Apparently a rival convent in Siena began distributing a knockoff version of the Florentine nuns' most popular neroli blend. The problem? They weren't using real orange blossoms, just cheap substitutes soaked in vinegar and dyed with saffron. Word got around. The Florentine abbess responded the only way a nun could. She sent the rival abbess a gift basket full of real neroli, labelled with a prayer card and a note May this humble offering remind you of the difference between devotion and deception. You almost choke. That's holy shade. Lucia smiles. We do not fight, she says. We scent. It wasn't always so passive. Some abbesses did use their perfume trade as leverage. You learn of Sister Madalena, who refused to sell her convents perfume to a local bishop until he agreed to stop taxing their olive groves. He eventually folded. The scent was simply too good. Back in the scriptorium, you watch another nun pour a small vial of essence into a letter pouch. This one is going to Rome, to a high-ranking cleric known to have a soft spot for neroli. She rolls the parchment tight, slips it into a beeswax-sealed pouch, and blesses it with a cross made of sandalwood ash. Not every letter smells like strategy. Some, many, are simply prayers in perfume. Requests for healing. Thank you notes. Letters from women who once lived here, now married off or widowed, asking for the comfort of a scent that reminds them who they once were, because perfume doesn't just travel outward, it loops back, a bridge, a memory trail. Before you leave, Isabella lets you hold one of the original fragrance codices wrapped in silk and tied with twine. Inside are notes about quantities, storage conditions, and who received which blends in which years. The careful record keeping is astonishing. Some batches were labelled reserved for patrons, others for feast days only, and one simply marked dangerous. No explanation. You raise your eyebrows. Lucia shrugs. Some recipes, she says, aren't for mortal noses. She might be joking, might. You leave the scriptorium with the realization that for these women, perfume isn't just a sensory art. It's a form of diplomacy, a scented signature, a gentle but unshakable form of power. And that's when it hits you. You're not just smelling history, you're watching it negotiate. There's something sacred about the early morning hush in a convent, the kind of quiet that seems to hold its breath just before the first bell rings. But today, instead of prayer or hymns, you follow the scent of warm resins and sun-warmed herbs drifting through the cloisters like a secret trail. You're headed to the chapel, but not for Mass. You're here to discover how perfume didn't just serve the body or barter for favors. It wove its way into divine ritual. Because in this place, fragrance is not merely decoration. It is liturgy. Lucia leads you in through a side door, a shortcut reserved for sisters and the occasional dizzy visitor, you mostly. The air shifts instantly, cooler, darker, older. The stone under your feet is worn smooth from centuries of steps, and the high, vaulted ceilings trap every scent like a cathedral-shaped bottle. Mainstream historical fact. In Renaissance, Catholicism, incense and perfumed oils were essential to worship. Frankincense, myrrh, and spikenard were burned or anointed in rituals symbolizing purification, sacrifice, and divine presence. These weren't just remnants of biblical tradition, they were daily, tactile parts of faith. Lucia kneels briefly near the altar, then beckons you forward to a side sacristy where the preparation happens. It smells like cedar, beeswax, rosewater, and faintly, unexpectedly, like oranges. This, she says, holding up a small engraved bottle, is chrism oil for baptisms, blessings, consecration. You lean in to sniff and instantly feel like your brain has just been kissed by a sunbeam and scolded by a spice merchant. It's sharp and warm and oddly grounding. There's no mistaking the sense that this isn't just scent, it's presence. Something bigger than you. Fringe fact? The oil of chrism wasn't just perfumed, it was often blended by high-ranking clergy using secret recipes. some of which included ambergris, cinnamon, or even rare flower extract smuggled from the east. In some convents, only the abbess could unlock the chest containing the sacred oils. Lucia shows you a small golden brazier, already smouldering with a mix of frankincense and dried fig leaves. The smoke curls upward like prayer made visible, shifting in the beams of coloured light pouring through stained glass. You watch as another sister carries it down the aisle, the thin silver chains of the censer clinking softly with each step. The way the smoke moves is hypnotic. You understand suddenly how easy it is to mistake fragrance for revelation. She explains that scent in worship had a layered function. It masked the less than heavenly smells of tightly packed bodies. It helped worshippers focus their thoughts, but more than that, it transformed the space, made it feel different, other, holy. Historians still argue whether the rise of perfumed worship was a theological choice or a sensory strategy to make the church more emotionally immersive. Some claim it was a necessary counter to the cold austerity of Protestant reformers who favoured simplicity. Others say it was just good sense. If heaven had a smell, surely this was it. You sit quietly as a low chant begins in the chapel, just voices, no instruments. The incense lingers between notes, catching in your throat a little, like smoke you remember from a childhood candlelit service. One nun, eyes closed, raises a vial of rose oil and anoints a statue of the Virgin Mary with a single drop on her brow. It's both casual and profound, like kissing someone's forehead just before they sleep. There's even perfume for the dead. You're told that at funerals the sisters prepare a sweet sleep blend rubbed into the palms and soles of the deceased. It's not about masking odour, it's about giving the departed a fragrant send-off, one final comfort for the body and a signal to the soul. You glance at the chapel walls where faint outlines of frescoes still cling to the plaster. One depicts Mary Magdalene holding a long-necked vial, her eyes lifted skyward. In many traditions, she is the patroness of perfume, not because she wore it, but because she used it. Poured it over Christ's feet, wiped it with her hair, and turned a simple fragrance into one of the Bible's most enduring metaphors for devotion. Quirky tidbit. Some nuns believed that the scent left behind by a saint's relic, called the odour of sanctity, was evidence of their holiness. In some rare cases, witnesses reported that even years after death, the bones or burial cloths of certain nuns still smelled faintly of violets, cinnamon, or roses. Whether that's divine proof or really good embalming is still under discussion. Lucia whispers that one of their own, Sister Amata, was said to leave behind the scent of pears and mint. Her grave is still visited by townsfolk who swear. The breeze shifts near her stone. You leave the chapel feeling slightly altered, less solid, like you've been partially dissolved in incense, and yet oddly comforted. You realize, as the sisters return their vials to their little wooden cabinets, that scent in this space isn't luxury, it's language, a form of prayer, a vocabulary of the unsayable. The perfume made here is not for sale, not for flirting, not even for healing the body. This perfume is for mystery, for transcendence, for reminding you that there are things in this world like faith, like fragrance, that are invisible but unforgettable. Before you go, Lucia lets you anoint your wrist with a tiny drop of the convent's oldest ritual blend. The scent clings softly to your skin, rich with centuries of use. It smells like spiced fig and dusted rose petals, like wax and whispers, like a door just barely ajar between two worlds. And as you step back into the daylight, your pulse carries it forward, a portable chapel. You step back into the herb garden with sunlight on your face and scent still clinging to your wrist like a memory that refuses to leave. But there's no time to drift off, because today the convent has a special guest. A knock echoes from the front gate, firm, expectant, very non-monastic. You follow Lucia to the visitor's parlour, where behind a heavy wooden grate stands a woman wrapped in silk and opinion.
Rings on every finger, hat like a pastry. You don't know her name yet, but everything about her says, I am used to being important. Meet the patronessa. Mainstream historical fact. Wealthy noblewomen often supported convents financially and spiritually, especially when they had daughters or nieces living inside.
But more than just donors, many became creative collaborators and clients, working directly with nuns to commission everything from altar cloths to perfume blends. Lucia whispers that this particular patronessa, Contessa Dianora, is a regular.
Visit her. She doesn't come for sermons. She comes for the scent. And today, she wants a custom perfume. Not just any perfume. A perfume that smells like revenge. You blink. Apparently her husband has taken a mistress. A much younger, much more blonde one.
The Contessa, in response, has decided that she doesn't need tears. She needs a new signature scent. Something that says, I am still powerful. I am still desired. And also, don't touch my inheritance. The sisters, to their credit, don't flinch. Sister Cecilia, the convent's unofficial nose, ushers the Contessa into a small side room, less a lab and more a velvet confessional for scent secrets. You follow, silent as a cat. On the table, trays of oils, a feather fan, a basin of rosewater, and a bowl of raw cacao nibs, which you suspect are not entirely medicinal. This is where artistry takes over. Cecilia begins with questions, not just, what do you want to smell like? But, what do you want them to feel when they smell you? The Contessa leans in, conspiratorial. I want them to feel nervous, like they've just remembered a debt they forgot to pay. Bold, the blend begins. First note, crushed blackcurrant buds, sharp, green, like the warning before a storm. Second, damask rose aged in oil for 6 weeks, soft and seductive, but only after the sting. Third, a few drops of labdanum, which smells like amber and leather and unfinished stories. Fourth, a whisper of clove. You watch as Cecilia stirs the blend with a glass rod, then closes her eyes, inhales deeply, and nods. This, she says, will haunt dinner parties. Quirky tidbit. In the Renaissance, perfumers occasionally used substances called animalics to give a scent depth and sensuality. Things like musk from deer, civet from cats, and even castoreum from beavers. In convents, these ingredients were controversial. Some were banned outright. Others, quietly used under euphemistic names like amber resin or sacred sap. This blend avoids the taboo. Mostly. The Contessa dabs the result onto her wrists, neck, and, unexpectedly, her fan. She flutters it once and the room seems to shift. You don't smell revenge. You smell velvet traps and overripe plums, and the moment just before a secret is spilled. It's unsettling. It's perfect. She leaves satisfied, leaving behind a generous pouch of coins, a bolt of silk, and, oddly, a miniature portrait of her husband with devil horns penciled in. For inspiration, she smirks. Historians still argue whether nuns producing personal perfumes for patrons blurred the line between holy service and vanity trade. Some believed it was unseemly, fragrance for flirtation made by women sworn to celibacy. Others argue it was empowerment, a way for cloistered women to influence courtly life without ever setting foot inside it. Back in the lab, the sisters laugh softly over the leftover oils. "She'll be back," one says. They always come back. You ask if they ever created a scent for themselves, just for joy. Lucia nods and shows you a small bottle, tucked away in a drawer, labelled per usum internum, for internal use. You unscrew the top and inhale. It smells like spring mornings and clean sheets, like stolen moments of happiness, like laughing too loud over something very small. You don't ask what's in it. You don't want to know. Some things should stay. Alchemical. Before you leave, you glance at the table. Another blend is being prepared. This one for a young bride. The opposite of the Contessa's venomous glamour. Soft neroli, sweet lemon, a touch of almond. She wants to smell like hope. In steam, this room, one scent is fury, another, forgiveness. Perfume becomes the language these women are not allowed to speak aloud. Emotion in vapor form, their politics, their poetry, their private resistance. It hits you then. For women who could not raise banners or voices, who could not march in streets or speak from pulpits, the only battlefield left was the air itself. And by heaven, they claimed it. You wake up the next morning in the guest cell, disoriented by birdsong and the faint aroma of lavender that lingers like a sleep spell, just now breaking. A soft knock on the wooden door. It's Lucia again, because of course it is. Her hands, full of linen, her voice already too awake. "Today," she says with a smile, "you're going on a field trip." She doesn't use those exact words, obviously, but that's what it feels like. Because today, you and a small company of sisters are leaving the convent walls to visit a nearby apothecary market, an open-air melange of noise, spice, bargaining, and wide-eyed goats. This is where the nuns get their rarest ingredients. Mainstream, historical fact. Renaissance convents weren't always fully self-sufficient. While many grew their own herbs and flowers, exotic resins, spices, and oils had to be purchased or bartered from local markets or traveling traders. This created a fascinating intersection between cloistered life and the roaring world outside. As soon as the gate swings open, the world changes tempo. The road is dusty, the sun is bold, and the market is already pulsing with people hawking everything from silk to salted fish. The sisters travel in twos, cloaked and veiled, a quiet tide of black and white amidst the sea of colours. You feel like a medieval spy, one who smells faintly of myrrh. The perfume stall is easy to find, just follow your nose. The vendor is a man with eyebrows like hedgehogs and a grin that could sell fish to a cat. "Ah, le sorel," he cries, looking for something divine. Lucia rolls her eyes so gently it almost qualifies as prayer. They begin sorting through tiny flasks, rose otto from Damascus, sandalwood from Goa, clove buds wrapped in muslin. The sisters examine each with the kind of focus most people reserve for marriage proposals. One nun, Sister Bernadetta, quietly selects a strange waxy lump wrapped in oilcloth. She unwraps it just enough for you to catch the scent. Earthy, sweet, slightly marine. It's ambergris fringe. Fact: ambergris is a waxy substance produced in the intestines of sperm whales and sometimes found floating on the ocean or washed up on shores. Though its origin is unromantic, it was, and is, one of the most prized ingredients in perfumery, known for its unique ability to fix other scents, making them last longer. It also costs more than gold, gram for gram. The vendor watches, with a practiced smirk. Very rare, very sacred, he purrs. Smells like prayer and pirates. Sister Bernadetta places it in her satchel like it's contraband. Around the corner, you stumble upon something more chaotic, a stall selling distillation equipment. Brass alembics, glass retorts, copper tubing coiled like a sleeping snake. The nun running the convent's lab, Sister Dominica, lights up like a candle. She haggles furiously with a merchant over the price of a new condenser tube. "Do you
even know what that does?" you whisper. She shrugs. "I know it would make my rosemary water clearer. That's enough." Historians still argue whether convents merely followed existing perfumery trends or actively influenced them.
Some claim that female monastics pioneered extraction techniques centuries ahead of secular artisans. Others think the credit was lost to anonymous church records that rarely named individual nuns. You pass a butcher, then the spice cart, then a man trying to sell you a slightly dented lute. The nuns stick close together, but you can see their eyes absorbing everything. New tools, new ingredients, new faces. They're not just buying, they're scouting. Quirky tidbit? Some convents reportedly use trained pigeons to smuggle tiny parcels of herbs or recipes between religious houses, bypassing strict enclosure rules. Think of it as a very aromatic version of carrier mail. Back at the perfume store, Sister Cecilia quietly buys a handful of dried tuberose and something labelled only Essenza di Ombra, essence of shadow. You're too afraid to ask, but she offers you a whiff and you nearly stagger. It's like dusk and cold marble and lost love. You're starting to realize something dangerous. You're becoming addicted to the idea of scent as story. The sisters gather, ready to return. Their baskets are heavier now, so are their imaginations. On the walk back, they speak in hushed voices about new blends. Someone suggests creating a scent based on the 4 evangelists. Matthew would smell like figs and ink, one giggles. Mark would be pepper and wine. Luke? Mint and lemon balm, always the healer. And John? Oh, John would smell like thunder before rain. You suddenly feel like you're walking not with nuns, but with witches, artists, prophets, all disguised in modest veils. As you reach the convent gate, one of the younger sisters leans in and whispers, "Tomorrow we distill, you'll help," and for a moment, despite your aching feet and your uncertain place in this world of fragrant rituals and silent power, you feel chosen. Morning fog coils over the cloister garden like breath on a mirror. You wake to the low clang of a bell and the unmistakable sound of water bubbling over flame. Today is not about blending or bottling. Today is about transformation. You follow the scent trail to the convent's distillation chamber, a humble room with a stone floor and wooden shelves crammed with glassware that looks like it belongs in a potions class, taught by someone with very high cheekbones. This is the engine room of the nuns' perfumery, the heart, the hearth. Sister Dominica is already there, sleeves rolled up, her hair tucked under her veil like a secret. On the table, a small copper alembic, coils of tubing, a bowl of fresh rosemary, a flask of water, and you. You're handed a mortar and pestle. Time to earn your keep. Mainstream historical fact. The process of distillation, separating essential oils from plant matter, was revolutionized during the Renaissance, especially in Italy. Though the technique existed earlier, new apparatus designs, some adapted from Islamic alchemical sources, made it far more effective. And guess who became early adopters? That's right, cloistered women with time, brains and an endless thirst for beauty. Lucia explains the basics while crushing lemon balm into green pulp. The herbs are soaked in water and gently heated. Steam rises, carrying aromatic compounds through the curved neck of the alembic into a coil, and finally drips out the other end as hydrosol, the watery cousin of essential oil. The stronger oil floats to the top. That's your prize. The rosemary begins to boil. Slowly, the room changes. The air grows dense with clarity. You don't just smell rosemary. You are rosemary. You begin to question whether you've always been rosemary and just forgot. Joke 1. If existential crises had a scent, they'd be herbal and slightly antiseptic. As the first drops of oil collect in a tiny glass vial, the sisters lean in like they're watching the birth of a star. Lucia murmurs, "Every drop is a decision, a part of the plant's soul." That's not just poetic, it's practical. Some plants yield only a ghost of oil, like violet, who give just enough fragrance to remind you of what you'll never fully possess. Others, like frankincense, seem eager to spill their guts. Fringe tidbit. In at least one Florentine convent, records show nuns experimented with cold enfleurage, a process where flower petals are pressed into animal fat to extract fragrance over days or weeks. Imagine explaining that during confession. You're told to label the fresh rosemary oil with the date, time and phase of the moon. Not superstition, just atmospheric data. The sisters keep meticulous journals of every batch, noting even the weather, the mood in the room, the particular hymn they were humming during distillation. Historians still argue whether these records were practical or mystical. Some claim they reflect early scientific methodology, predating laboratory notes by centuries. Others see in them a devotional practice, perfume making as prayer, chemistry as liturgy. The next herb is lavender, and the room turns into a lullaby. Sister Bernadetta pipes up with a story about the time they tried distilling saffron. "We forgot to ventilate," she laughs. "The entire cloister was giggling for hours." Lucia adds, "It smelled like luxury and poor decisions." Joke 2. Turns out the only thing more intoxicating than saffron is the knowledge that you've just wasted 200 florins of it. Once the oils are cooled, they're funneled into tiny glass bottles, blue, green, amber, color-coded not for aesthetics but preservation. Light is the enemy of fragrance, and the nuns protect their potions like precious relics. You're assigned to the hydrosols next, the floral waters left behind after distillation. Less intense than oil, but deeply versatile. Used in skin tonics, linen sprays, and sometimes even in baking. Sister Cecilia pours rosewater into a ceramic jug labeled simply Peace. You ask if they sell it. She smiles. "No, but we give it to women who've lost children." Silence settles over the lab like snow. You don't speak for several minutes. Instead, you help seal the jars, wipe the benches, mop up errant drips of jasmine water that smells like someone remembering their wedding night. Quirky historical twist? Some convents trained novice nuns specifically in scent vocabulary, creating internal scent lexicons to describe and classify their creations. One Venetian house reportedly had over 300 coded terms, like selva chiusa, closed forest, or rugiada d'oro, golden dew, used exclusively among the sisters. By late afternoon, the shelves are fuller, the air is thicker, and you're dizzy from more than just the fumes. You realize that distillation is not just the capturing of scent, but the preservation of time, Each vial is a moment held hostage, a memory liquefied. Sister Dominica tucks the last jar into a box lined with straw. "This will go to the infirmary," she says. "For the dying. Lavender helps them rest." Joke 3. You briefly consider bottling sarcasm, but the sisters assure you it doesn't distill well. As the sun begins to slant through the small, round window, you feel something shift inside you. Not just a deeper respect for monastic chemistry, something more personal. You're beginning to understand that scent is the only language that speaks before reason. It bypasses logic and kicks open memory's back door. These nuns are fluent in that language, alchemists not of gold, but of longing, healing, and goodbye. And maybe you're not just visiting anymore, maybe you're listening. You wake up to candlelight flickering across stone walls and the subtle hum of rain whispering against the cloister windows. The air carries a new scent this morning, resinous, citrusy, a little spicy. You follow it like a bloodhound trailing a ghost, and it leads you not to the lab, not to the gardens, but to the scriptorium. The scent of ink and beeswax isn't what surprises you. It's what's happening. Lucia and Sister Bernadetta are hunched over a parchment-strewn table, surrounded by glass-stoppered vials and a stack of slim, leather-bound notebooks, and one big, iron-bound ledger that looks like it could break a foot if dropped. Today isn't about mixing or distilling. Today is about naming, mainstream historical fact. Renaissance nuns didn't just produce perfumes, they documented them. Many convents kept formularies, recipe books, or herbals containing carefully transcribed scent formulas, methods, and botanical observations. These were equal parts medical manual, spiritual journal, and scientific log, and they were often encoded. Sister Bernadetta shows you a slip of parchment labeled Acqua della Pietà, water of pity. Below the title, a curious recipe unfolds. Cloves,
Steeped in white wine, crushed roses, lemon peel, a few drops of frankincense.
The instructions are written in a blend of Latin, Tuscan shorthand, and something that might be personal abbreviation or code. You raise an eyebrow. Why the secrecy, you ask? Lucia taps the edge of the paper. Some formulas were too valuable to share. Others, too powerful to misunderstand. Historians still argue whether these hidden scent codes were meant to protect recipes from rival convents, or whether they represented a deeper layer of symbolic language, perfumes as spiritual, metaphors crafted to mirror inner transformations. The ledger they're working in today is a Liber Fragrantiarum, book of fragrances. Each page contains one perfume, a name, a list of ingredients, method of preparation, and, most hauntingly, a purpose. One reads Essenza per la notte dei sospiri, essence for the night of sighs, notes of violet, almond milk, and myrrh. Purpose? To accompany longing. You don't know whether to wear it or weep into it. Fringe tidbit. A few surviving convent perfume books include annotations like tiny prayers, or even short poems next to each formula. One 16th century nun added this to a rosewater tonic. Soften this world, that the next may not burn. You help by gently lifting vials as Lucia sniffs and scribbles. Every scent requires a name, and naming is no small act here. It's part cataloguing, part divination. She opens a new bottle and breathes in cedar, orange peel, and benzoin. She writes, Fuoco di Giacobbe, Jacob's fire. Joke. One, you suggest, eau de existential crisis. She writes it down, deadpan, for future use. Later, the sisters debate a name for a blend of wormwood, cinnamon, and dried apple blossom. Sister Cecilia votes for La Morte di Eva, Eve's death. Lucia counters with Alba del Perdono, dawn of forgiveness. They go with both, two sides of the same scent. You realize this is how they see fragrance, not just sensory, but narrative. Each bottle holds a tension, a story, a prayer, a risk. In a smaller notebook, barely larger than your palm, you find what looks like a list of unmakeable perfumes. Ideas too volatile, illegal, or simply impossible. Among them, Acqua del Voto Infranto, water of the broken vow. Red sandalwood, black pepper, burned parchment. Olio del Sonno Eterno, oil of eternal sleep. Only half the ingredients are listed. You don't ask why. Nebbia del Paradiso, Mr. Paradise. Marked with a single word, forbidden. Quirky fact? Some convents experimented with scent to provoke or mimic spiritual states. There are scattered accounts of angelic blends, perfumes designed to enhance visions during prayer, made with exotic spices and mind-altering herbs like datura or hyoscyamus. The church was not thrilled. You look around and realize this is a library of invisible things. No pages you can dog-ear, no passages to underline, just fragrances bottled and named, waiting for the right moment to be remembered. Lucia tells you that when a sister dies, her signature scent is burned in, a thurible during her funeral mass. The formula is then sealed in wax and stored in a drawer labeled Memoriae. No one else wears it again. That hits harder than expected. Joke. 2, you quietly wonder if your own signature scent would be fear, sweat, and espresso. The work continues into the afternoon. The sisters pause often to sip Annie's tea, rinse their hands, or simply breathe. You begin to appreciate the discipline this requires, not just the olfactory sensitivity, but the emotional restraint. One wrong note, and a perfume becomes noise. One right one, and it becomes prayer. Lucia hands you a phial of something thick and green, basil, mint, olive leaf. It smells like a garden after a storm. She waits for your reaction. You say, it smells like starting over. She smiles and writes, Renascita, rebirth. The day ends with shelves full of bottles, each crowned with a handwritten tag, each tied with twine like a gift no one asked for, but desperately needed. You help clean up. Fold the linen scent strips, reorganize the scent wheel, put the ink away. Sister Bernadetta says, naming is how we claim memory. Before language, there was only scent. And suddenly it makes sense. These nuns aren't just chemists or artists, or archivists. They're naming the pieces of a world most people forget to notice, one fragrance at a time. You wake today to silence thick enough to wear. No morning chatter, no clatter of vials or chant echoing in the stone hallways. Only the steady breath of the convent itself, and the low rhythm of your own pulse, your led, not told, not asked, to. The apothecary wing, something has shifted. The perfumery you've come to know, full of creative chaos and gentle laughter, gives way to its more solemn twin. Bottles here aren't for flirtation or celebration. They're for the body, the failing body, the injured, the dying. Mainstream historical fact, Renaissance convents, especially in Italy, often doubled as medical centers. Nuns weren't just perfumers. They were caregivers, surgeons, early pharmacists. Their aromatic concoctions blurred the lines between medicine and luxury, science and ritual. Today, you're in the thick of it. The shelves here brim with balms, tinctures, and distillates labeled with names far less poetic. unguento per ustioni, ointment for burns, olio per dogle, oil for childbirth pain, estratto di ruta, rue extract for fever. Lucia stands by a tiled counter, pestle in hand, grinding something sticky and dark. Clove, you think? Myrrh. Maybe opium? This is not a day for elegance. You help sterilize small ceramic pots, line them with cloth, and watch as Sister Cecilia weighs out crushed camphor and almond oil for a salve. The room smells sharp, medicinal, like being awake whether you wanted to be or not. Fringe tidbit. One convent in Perugia recorded a plague balm that included bear fat, garlic, pine resin, and wine. The recipe was stored behind a locked door and only accessed during outbreaks. You are, quite frankly, relieved not to be sniffing that. Joke. You ask if it worked. Lucia replies, well, some people lived, some people didn't. So yes, over. The next few hours, you learn how scent becomes treatment. Lavender oil for sleep, mint for nausea,
marjoram for grief, though that last one's more emotional than chemical. Sister Bernadetta explains that perfumes aren't just worn, they're anointed. The temples, wrists, behind the knees, pulse points become prayer points. And when the
pain is unbearable, there's frankincense smoked softly in a brass dish until the air itself turns into anesthesia. Historians still argue whether these aromatic interventions were truly effective or largely placebo. Some claimed the nuns' remedies were more potent than their male counterparts due to better documentation and less reliance on bloodletting. Others say their success came from gentleness, not pharmacology. You see both at play here. A young postulant arrives with a swollen eye and bruised lip. No one asks what happened. Sister Cecilia applies a compress of rosewater and chamomile, murmuring something in Latin. The girl weeps, not in pain but relief. Later you help prepare acqua del sonno, sleep water, a warm infusion of lavender, poppy seed, and valerian, stirred 12 times counterclockwise as tradition demands. You sip it yourself out of curiosity. It tastes like bedtime. Joke 2. Or like being gently punched in the brain by a cloud. The sisters work in unspoken synchrony. Lucia knows when Cecilia needs more balm. Bernadetta preps gauze without being asked. It's choreography honed by years of tending bodies and souls alike. You read through an old medical ledger and find entries both clinical and heartbreaking. Brother Tommaso burns to left hand, soot inhalation, treated with calendula unguent. Sang Ave Maria in broken meter. Young novice refused food for 3 days. Applied lavender oil and St. John's wort tea. No improvement. Mother Agnesa, final anointing, used personal rose, blend. Lightest touch. No tears. Quirky detail. Some convents assigned each sister a personal last perfume, a scent reserved only for their final rites. The formula was often created years before death, tailored to the sister's life.
Preferences and vocation, it's
intimate. You ask Lucia about hers. She answers softly. You've smelled it already. You think back. Maybe it was the one with frankincense and hyacinth, or the rosemary blend that made you feel seen. You don't press. Later, you help fold linen sheets laced with clove water and lemon balm. They're stored in a cedar-lined chest to be used when illness strikes, not if. When, even in this room of sorrow, there's grace. A slow, deliberate choosing of comfort over panic, of care over cure. And suddenly, you understand. The nuns. Real perfume isn't in the bottles. It's in the way they touch someone's hand, wrap a wound, hum while applying balm. It's in the silence they keep. Joke 3. You wonder if they bottle sarcasm for migraines. Lucia hands you a mint sachet and says, "Close enough." By the end of the day, the apothecary glows with the warmth of oil lamps and eucalyptus steam. You feel tired, not just physically, but in your bones. The kind of tired that comes from bearing witness. You help pack a small wooden box, 2 balms, a bottle of sleep water, a linen roll of scent strips, for delivery to the infirmary. As you close the lid, you realize this is what it means to be remembered. Not by name, but by touch, by fragrance, by the smallest acts done with great care. You are more than a visitor now. You are scented memory. You wake to bells again, but not the usual clean chime of morning mass. This one's slower, lower. A bell that rings once for the living, once for the dead. Someone has passed. You're not told who, but the mood tells you everything. The convent is quiet, not still, just hushed. Even the wind seems to fold in its edges, letting the walls hold the weight of grief. You're not sent to the garden or the lab this morning. Lucia takes your hand, unexpected, warm, and leads you to a narrow stone passage you haven't seen before. A door opens inward into a room bathed in golden candlelight. "To Cecellum," she whispers. The little sanctuary, mainstream historical. Fact. Renaissance convents often had a small private chapel used for rites not open to the public, confession, penance, and final prayers. Some even had adjacent scent vaults, cabinets, or alcoves, storing precious aromatic oils for funerary rituals and anointings. This is where they come to say goodbye. At the center of the room stands a low bier draped in ivory linen. No body yet, but everything is ready. A thurible smoulders quietly nearby, breathing out slow spirals of frankincense. You help prepare. First the linens, steeped in rosewater and fig leaf, then the vessel, a small silver ampulla labeled Memoria Lutia C. You glance up, startled. Lucia shrugs. "I made mine years ago, just in case." Her scent, hyacinth, rosemary, the faintest echo of myrrh. It's not sad, it's steady. You place the ampulla gently beside the others in the memorial niche, a carved wooden case housing decades worth of little bottles, each one a sister's olfactory signature. Not names, not dates, just essence. Fringe tidbit? Some convents burn these final scents like incense during funerals, believing the fragrance helped lift the soul heavenward. Others anointed the hands and eyelids of the deceased as a final act of sensory grace. You open a small drawer labeled Adagio. Inside, lavender sachets, beeswax candles, linen strips, all soft things, things that soothe rather than shout. There's one bottle left to unseal. Lucia passes it to you, aqua della partenza, water of departure. She doesn't explain, she doesn't need to. Historians still argue whether these rites were more symbolic than spiritual, more personal than doctrinal. But you can't help feeling they had it exactly right. When words fail, scent speaks. Joke 1. You try to make a light comment. Well, at least no one's bottling eau de existential dread. But your voice catches. Lucia just gives your arm a gentle squeeze. Together, you set up the final scene, a circle of candles, a folded habit, and a shallow bowl for the oil. The silence around you becomes not empty, but full, dense with memory, ritual, and the invisible weight of presence. And then the procession arrives. Not dramatic. Just 5 sisters walking 2 by 2, chanting softly. They carry no flowers, only the body wrapped in linen cradled like something sacred. The room becomes stiller than death itself. You step back. Watch. The anointing begins. Oil touches the forehead, the palms, the lips, each motion accompanied by a verse in Latin, sung like a lullaby. You realize something strange. The scent is beautiful, not funereal, not antiseptic, but warm, earthy, floral. It smells like coming home. Quirky fact? Some surviving convent manuals describe their perfume for death as being intentionally joyful in tone. One recipe includes orange blossom, honey, and vanilla to remind mourners of sweetness, even in sorrow. The Mass is brief, no sermon. Just scent, song, and silence. Afterward, the sisters leave single file. No one cries aloud. No one hurries. Lucia stays behind with you. She lights one more candle. Then she whispers, "You should go now." You start to protest. You want to help clean up. You want to do something. She smiles, already turning away. "We remember you. That's enough." You step into the corridor where the air smells like thyme and damp stone. You walk slowly, as if the perfume clings to your
robes. Maybe it does. You don't know if you'll ever come back, but you'll never forget, because now you carry them with you.
In your hair, in your skin, in the memory of 1,000 invisible things, the scent of women who turned petals into power, rituals into remedies, and silence into a story. They ran laboratories with no prestige, libraries with no nameplates, and apothecaries with no profit, but left behind a legacy richer than gold. They named each fragrance like a psalm, tended every bottle like an heirloom, and treated scent not as a luxury, but as memory, medicine, and miracle. And that's what you'll take with you. That's what will stay. Word count, 1 to 78, wind down, 300 words. And now, as the last echo of the convent bells fades into the hush of the night, you feel your breath soften, your shoulders loosen, your thoughts drift like smoke through a half-open window. The world these women built, half shadow, half science, is slipping gently from your fingers now, like the final trace of a fragrance on a pillow long after someone's gone. You've walked the gardens, touched the petals, stirred the oils. You've stood at the threshold of their hidden sanctum and watched grief burn into something holy. You don't need to remember every name, every ingredient, every whispered prayer. You just need to rest. Let the story settle in you like warm balm. Let the silence now be sweet, not empty. Picture a breeze passing through lavender rose at dusk. A vial placed tenderly on a wooden shelf. A voice humming somewhere nearby, just out of sight. If you listen, really listen, you might still smell it, the scent of care, the scent of memory. The perfume of a time when women wielded amber and basil like sacred texts, when every drop was deliberate, when fragrance meant you mattered. Breathe in. You're safe now. Let the night fold around. You sleep gentle and deep,